night of the Empire's last coronation smelled of cold iron and falling stars. Across a vault of ancient suns, light guttered like candles in a mausoleum, and signal beacons trembled toward silence. The throne orbital drifted inside a ring of broken god engines whose ribs rose like reefs, while pilgrim fleets anchored in the dark and prayed to machines that no longer remembered their names. On morning decks, children traced sigils in frost and asked why the sky felt heavier, and the priest lied softly that gravity was grieving with them. In that hush, a voice addressed those who listened across the void and across their rooms. We truly love and care for you, wherever you are, however your night is shaped. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. The coronation bell tolled once, and its note walked the length of the ring like a pilgrim who had given up on daylight. Aurelian Solon, called the Undying Regent, stood beneath a ceiling of chained stars and tasted the metallic breath of his own legend. Once he had been a boy on a salt world, counting the slow ships of comets as if they were caravans returning from a kinder horizon. He ascended by law, by science, by the patient erasure of sleep. Immortality carried him like an iron river, and at its mouth he found a crown nobody else could lift. To endure was his creed, and order his sacrament, until the sacrament began tasting of ash. Tonight the Empire's vitae oceans thrummed below the palace crust, enormous hearts of memory beating to his pulse, and the beat felt tired. Longevity had made him intimate with two questions that gnawed the edges of command. What is the mercy of an ending, and what remains of a person who never arrives at one? He had answers once, smooth as doctrine. Now the answers had the nervous eyes of prisoners. Beyond the orbital ring lay the scarlight reaches, loyal in old oaths and fresh in discontent, their fleets accreting like storm fronts rehearsing their first thunder. Their standard-bearer was Kyros, first Strategos, a son he had made from war and trust. Kyros had knelt at his side while the atlas of the Empire was redrawn in radiant lines. Kyros had named worlds in the regent's honor and burned other names to cinders. In quiet councils, the Strategos began to measure mercy as if it were a debt with compound interest, and the accounts never balanced. Rumour gave Kyros a new scripture, that the living could not kneel forever, and that the dead, even polished with eternity, could not lead. Rumour had a blade's grammar, and tonight its sentences were marching. The coronation was both ritual and rumour. Ritual to enshrine another century, rumour to invite the possibility of a clean wound. Choirs of engineered voices sculpted the air into domes and aisles. Sound made architecture, architecture made law. Pilgrim flotillas illuminated the ring with lantern ships, a necklace of brief fires around a throat made of night. The regent's councillors stood like grave markers, counting futures no one would inhabit. At the rim of the hall, banners that had once been colours now looked like scars sewn into velvet. Aurelian lifted his palm above the anointed crown and felt the vitae beat hitch, like a page uncertain it should be turned. He had loved once. Serin was mortal, a historian with hands that smelled of rain and parchment, a custodian of endings. Serin taught him how to close a book without rage, how to let dusk be dusk, how to count a life not by length but by the geometry of its last decision. Aurelian did not allow Serin an ending. He gave them guards, suites, laws shaped like walls, days that refused to die. Serin found a door that even emperors cannot lock. The Undying Regent built another monument in the corridor of his regret and named it Preservation. From its cold niche, he listened to love's complaint for a century. A messenger erupted from the ocular stare with breath like torn silk. "My liege," she said, "they have bridged. The Scarlight Armada rides a cord of night." Aurelian watched the math of betrayal unfurl in his mind. Folded jumps like paper swans. Pilgrim flotillas scattering like beads broken from thread. God engines lighting with the slow astonishment of altars discovering they were altars. He had stationed ward fleets on the marches, but the bridges were knotted from technology stolen, reimagined, or blessed by chance. Kyros had arrived before the coronation could finish naming itself. Ceremony continued because ceremony always pretends it can slow catastrophe by counting steps. A crown of black light descended upon Aurelian's temples and wrote stewardship into the calcium of his bones. The palace engines leaned nearer to hear his next breath. On the planet below, oceans rolled with their habitual fatigue, and cities layered themselves like tree rings upon prior ruins. The choirs raised the volume of heaven until even silence became obedient. He looked through the transparent floor and asked his first question aloud, so softly the hall mistook it for oath smoke. "Does continuity justify cruelty?" Nobody answered except the Vitae, and their answer was a tired thunder. He removed the crown. Gasps shattered like thin glass, and the seraphic engines recalibrated their orbits as if the palace had shifted axis. He signaled the heralds and spoke a word the Empire had nearly forgotten. Parley. The syllables sounded like a bridge anchored in mist. He ordered the gates thrown wide and sent a narrow band summons along every drift line to the Scarlight flagship. He called Kyros by the name learned at first oath, when neither of them yet practiced the posture of betrayal. The answer arrived as a hololith of snow and flame. The strategos removed his helm, face lean as an unsheathed truth. The hall waited, holding its fear like incense. Kyros's image burned above the dais, edges hissing with warlight. The oath spark in his eyes had cooled to tempered glass. "Aurelian," he said, his voice for bridges and stairwells alike, "I have come to close the interval your immortality keeps open." The hall tasted iron. Aurelian did not sit. "Parley," he answered. "Walk here. Speak near enough to hear your own breath." "Your corridors are traps," Kyros replied. "I will speak from my flagship while my armada holds the ring." He listened to distant voices stitched through his bones. "Withdraw your crown. Dissolve the vitae. End curfews that have forgotten dawn. Yield, and we breathe." The crown lay on its stand like a patient accusation. Deep below, the vitae hearts beat a tired thunder. Aurelian remembered Seren's hands finding the knot in his back after victory. "Preserve less," Seren had said. He had sealed that advice until it soured. "I will not end for a slogan," he said, "but I will end how we translate order into cages. Enter with 12. Leave your fleets beyond the cord." "An hour," Kyros said. "If I do not return, the ring becomes a lesson." The hololith darkened. Marshal Vara's jaw clenched. Magister Lix's data orbits shivered. The seer child Ione watched with pupils widened by futures. "Prism Hall," Aurelian told them. "Witnesses only." They crossed galleries where bronze emperors looked like failed weather. The Prism Hall widened until sound wandered. When Kyros entered with 12, their shadows arrived first. He did not kneel. Aurelian did not offer his hand. They stood inside a geometry of grief. "You taught me to read ledgers with a torch," Kyros said. Every page brightened into faces. "Your law harvested winters and named it mercy. Abdicate. Slow the vitae to stillness. Give the ring to breath. Sleep is not my skill, Aurelian replied, "but I can learn." He gestured, and the palace listened. "I end the emergency decrees. I end quotas that emptied dreams. I seed a council from marches and corps. I keep a remnant of vitae only long enough to archive the names we wronged. Then the hearts sleep." "And you?" Kyros asked. "Where does the undying go when breath becomes honest?" "To the quiet Serin found and left ajar," Aurelian said. "If a door exists, I will attempt it." He looked at the 12, a navigator with charts tattooed under her eyelids, a chaplain whose hymnal was Scar, a pilot whose shake vanished on a stick. Not monsters, only volunteers for a hard clarity. "If I lower myself," he said, "promise to lift those I press down." "I promise to try," Kyros said. He stepped closer. The hall drew tight. Ione's voice brushed the air. "He carries a coffin of light," she said, not naming which man. Kyros glanced at the child, offended by prophecy, then respectful of accuracy. Lix's numbers found no traction. Vara leaned toward violence and froze under duty's hand. Aurelian opened the palace like a throat. Gates, unflowered. Shields dipped until stars could eavesdrop. "We will tell them," he said. "Beside me. We will be seen." "Beside," Kyros echoed. "If you stall, I break the sky." "Break it," Aurelian answered, "and prove you are my son." They walked to the rostrum. The throne orbital turned like a patient instrument. Aurelian's hands trembled. He let them. "People of the ring," he said, "I have stood too long. I rescind the decrees. I open the nights. I promise a council. The vitae will record our dead and then sleep." Kyros's voice joined. "Scarlight ships withdraw beyond the cord. No vengeance. Justice by breath, not blade. If we fail, remember this hour and demand more." The broadcast ended. "Now the bridges," Kyros said. "We unlace them before hungry captains decide the hour was too long." "Together," Aurelian replied. "It might have ended without blood." The shot came from a balcony. The bolt struck Vara, who took it like a mountain takes weather. He fell. The pilot roared. The chaplain tore a hymn into a tourniquet. Ione lifted both hands, and the air hesitated. Guards, who were not supposed to be there, came out of walls like guilty thoughts. Kyros reached for Aurelian and met him halfway, as if an old choreography had survived the grave. Their shoulders locked, their backs faced opposite storms. "Your palace," Kyros said, firing up. "Your ghosts." "Yours too," Aurelian answered, returning fire with the economy he used to sign decrees. Vara's blood found seams between tiles and wrote a poem the floor will not forget. 3 assassins fell. Others kept coming, brave and stupid with certainty. "Stand down," Kyros bellowed. "But loyalty is a prism that returns only the color it wants." The navigator marked shooters with a fingertip. Lix dragged Vara toward a niche intended as shelter. The chaplain poured pressure into a wound and called it prayer. Aurelian tasted the salt of a youth mislaid centuries ago. He leaned into the recoil as if into an embrace. "I wanted to design an ending," he said, "but endings are local weather." "Hold," Kyros answered, sounding at last like a son. The assassins faltered, hearing the story change tense. Outside, a fleet reconsidered appetite. The last shooter, cornered above the oculus, placed the muzzle under his tongue and took a private door. The shot rang small and final. Silence settled. Vara breathed, thin as thread. "Ledger kept," he managed. Ione pressed her palm to the wound. "Stay," she said. "We still need you to hate the right things." Kyros lowered his weapon. Aurelian lowered his. "The bridges unlace," Kyros said, listening to his world through bone. "Withdrawals begin." Aurelian looked up at the web of chained stars. One engine flickered. "The council will need teeth and humility," he murmured. "You give it one. I can teach the other by leaving." He felt the crown again, invisible and intact. Abdication would not absolve, but it could give the wound a clean edge. He nodded. "Come," he said. "Let's finish unmaking what I mistook for eternity." The resonance vault waited like a lung before the first breath, its walls veined with copper constellations and ash-dark circuits that remembered storms older than law. And Aurelian led Kyros and the 12 across the patient mirror of the floor, while pylons hummed with restrained distance, into the chamber where bridges could be unbraided without tearing the night, where the Empire kept instruments for persuading reality to reconsider. He touched the glass that remembered every departure, and the vault brightened to the color of old bone. Equations climbed the air like ivy chasing an absent sun as Ione cupped her hands as if catching snow and murmured that bridges were frightened things that must be steadied lest they shriek and vanish. "Unlace them," Kyros said, setting his helm aside, steam rising from his hair in the palace cold. "Let ships find sky the slow way again." Aurelian spoke a word that was apology braided with voltage. Valves turned with the patient theatrics of tides, and across the ring the luminous ropes slackened, humming reluctance, beautiful even while admitting they had been a mistake. The Scarlight Armada held beyond the cord, like wolves teaching themselves gentleness. "You could have done this centuries ago," Kyros observed without venom, as if inventorying a wound, and Aurelian answered that swiftness had once looked like rescue until he saw how often it arrested what it claimed to save. That humility tasted bitter until it grew clean. He asked Ione to keep the pulse low. She nodded, eyelids fluttering with rain-bright calculus, and said they were unbraiding, not severing. That knight preferred kindness to knives. He thought of Serin, historian of endings, of a letter he had carried a century without opening because he feared what graciousness might do to granite, and he left it in its sleeve a little longer, a star he could follow without looking. "The council," Kyros said, closing a final valve with the tenderness of a last glance. 5 from marches, 5 from core, a chair that turns each year to bruise no one place. Aurelian examined the design as a mason tapped stone for hidden water and added a seat that would remain empty, bearing the names of the dead, turning as the others turned, so that every decision remembered who it stepped on. Lix nodded, eyes cold as tools, and Vara grunted approval that hurt him to make. The attack arrived as absence first, a seam of silence along the eastern gallery where the palace should have whispered, and Aurelian let muscle memory discover what thought was not yet brave enough to name as 30 figures entered with the courtesy of ghosts, uniforms mismatched, certainty polished, each weapon dignified beyond its owner. Kyros moved with patient winter violence learned in siege schools. Aurelian spoke again to the vault's nerve, smoothing power with cadence even while the air stitched itself with bolts. Vara's hand closed over a pistol he was not supposed to touch, and he touched it anyway, laying down a sentence of defiance as Ione's thin voice anchored allies to cover, and Lix collapsed pathways beneath intruders until the floor argued against their aims. Blood found the mirrored stone and wrote cursive the janitors would never erase. On the third exchange, Kyros met a zealot at breath's distance and turned certainty into a soft noise, while Aurelian drew fire toward himself, subtracting threat from those he could not afford to lose. "Stand down," Kyros called, and 4 obeyed, while others, rehearsed too long for martyrdom, refused. But soon silence returned to counting, and the hall remembered how to be a room where choices were made rather than a mouth that spat iron. Together they closed the last bridge, the cord that had carried Scarlight into the ring. It dimmed like a lantern giving its light to memory, and stars resumed the discipline of distance, while lantern ships drifted in neighborly orbits and wolf shapes withdrew with human reluctance. In the quiet, Aurelian slid out the slim box and broke the seal Serin's fingers had once convinced Wax to keep. The paper smelled of rain and archives, and he read with his mouth, because secrets carried alone deform the bearer. If he loved order, he must teach it to end. He must not confuse rescue with arrest. He must let the Empire sleep and learn breath without witnesses. He folded the letter with priestly care and returned it to its keep, then said dusk, and that at dusk he would abdicate. The Vitae would record claims for 1 week and then rest, and he would walk toward the door Serin had found. Dusk comes when you name it, Kairos answered, and Aurelian replied that a sun should be seen to move, that they would walk the districts and let anger map itself. They left the vault to its cooling hymns. Corridors smelled of copper and rain dust where statues exhaled, and citizens gathered behind cordons and the softer borders of fear as Aurelian walked slowly to give those who needed to hate room for correct angles. He answered questions with the grammar of responsibility rather than prophecy. To a child asking whether knights would keep curfew, he said knights would try. To a woman whose brother lay coded in a vitae heart, he promised the week and then sleep and an ordinance forbidding any hand to wake them. A guild mistress of water pressed a tin cup into his palm and asked him to drink like anyone, and the water tasted of unbound rivers and distant metal. When he asked what she wanted most, she answered paths for water that forgot the straight lines men like him admired, and he told her they would erase some rulers. Afternoon thinned into evening. Lanterns collected like towns rehearsing the sea, and from a balcony that used to command, and now only listened, he watched. Scarlight lines respect the cord, distances held by promise rather than targeting solution. Voids invite occupation, Kiros warned, not unkind, and Aurelian, with a rust-honest smile, said the council must be heavier than hunger, that his absence should hurt only as a skip-step teaches attention. Vara dozed and woke with the stubbornness of cliffs. Lix audited dusk like a ferocious kindness. Ione leaned on the parapet, eyes closed as if listening for footsteps on snow. Bells began for dusk, and servitors brushed ceremony free of dust, dust crowning the air like a brief republic, as Aurelian touched the place on his brow where the invisible circlet rested and felt history and nothing. It will hurt, Kiros said, and Aurelian agreed because pain proves the edge belongs to the one who holds it. And then Ione stiffened with her hand raised, palm to the dark, as if greeting something that refused to be seen, and whispered, "Listen." A new tone threaded the bells, thin and patient as wire, polite as a letter, deliberate as a knife wrapped in cloth. Lix frowned like an engineer at a hairline crack and said it was not theirs and not Scarlight's, while lanterns flickered as if a vast animal exhaled beneath them. "Someone else is arriving," Kiros said, and the words felt colder than winter. Aurelian looked past the cord and saw a bruise forming where no fleet waited, a hollow swelling with intention, and told the servitors to ready the dais because the unknown would not be greeted with absence, then closed his eyes a moment, found Serin's letter like a small fire, and opened them into the weather he had chosen. The bruise on the horizon widened until it pulsed like a heart too large for the body of the void, and from it emerged vessels that wore no signature of empire or Scarlight, their hulls carved as if by the patience of centuries rather than the ambition of war. They glided without thrust, pulled by geometries that bent light like supplicants, and every lantern in the ring bowed lower, sputtering in awe or fear. Aurelian felt the Vitae hearts quicken, remembering something older than his rule, and for a moment he feared the past had come back to collect its debt. Kairos stood beside him, jaw hard, watching the bruise resolve into a fleet that resembled a procession rather than an armada, though no procession arrived without intent. "Not ours," he said, the understatement of a man counting blades in the dark. Lix whispered that the design language was unfamiliar, not human, not catalogued, which meant ancient, forgotten, or deliberately concealed. Ione shivered, hands pressed to her temples, and murmured that the newcomers spoke without sound, that their message was a choir of memory fragments threaded into a single wound. The first vessel unfolded a canopy of stone-white wings, each feather etched with runes that refused to be read. The wings glowed like bone beneath moonlight, opening not to menace but to declare presence. Signals flooded the band spectrum. Not words but images. Oceans evaporating, thrones cracking, statues worn smooth by exile winds. Aurelian closed his eyes to receive them, each vision nesting in his skull like fossils reawakened, and recognized echoes of empires more patient than his, dead empires whose remains had been dust in his childhood. They were not visitors, but revenants. The dais beneath his feet trembled as if the palace itself had heard its makers. Kairos drew his sword, though the newcomers had fired nothing, because instinct required weapons where uncertainty reigned. "They come dressed in sermons," he said, "and sermons kill slower but deeper." Aurelian agreed without words, for he knew the tone of destiny when it entered a room uninvited. He turned to his people and spoke. "We will not answer yet. Let them speak through the air until their weight is revealed." The canopy wings shifted, and from their heart a figure descended in a sheath of light like a coffin standing upright. It touched the ring's perimeter without effort, walked as if floor and gravity bent to its devotion. Its face was a mask of silver, smooth and featureless, but voices poured from it. Dozens, hundreds, men, women, children, old, young, each sentence braided into the next. The hall's walls absorbed the chorus like soil drinking floodwater. The words said, "You preserve. You mistake preservation for mercy. You wear eternity like armor and call it gift. We are the unforgotten, the debtors of your choice." Aurelian's breath faltered, for he remembered the rituals of transference, the long-ago pact with beings that had offered endurance when flesh decayed, a pact he had thought severed. These were not new strangers. They were remnants of that first bargain, those who had not ascended, but had been left in half-light, wandering between ruin and godhood. The guilt landed in his chest like iron. Kairos looked at him sharply, suspicion narrowing into certainty. "You knew them." "They are fragments," Aurelian said, voice low, "of the covenant that made me what I am. I thought them scattered to dust." He did not meet his son's eyes. "They remember more than they should." The figure advanced until it stood beneath the balcony, light rippling around it like the surface of a dark lake. "We return not for you," the chorus said, "but for what you guarded against silence. The Vitae. Your hearts of memory are ours by right of origin. They are fragments of us, stolen, repurposed. You kept them beating as monuments. Now they beat for reunion." Lix's voice quavered despite her steel. "If they take the Vitae, every record collapses, every restitution undone." Ione whispered, "Not collapse, absorption. The dead will speak again, but not in words we choose. Kairos raised his blade. Then they cannot have them. His eyes burned with anger, but also betrayal. The realization that his father had kept a covenant hidden, even from him. The Strategos felt the ground tilting beneath the fragile trust they had rebuilt. Aurelian lifted his hand, commanding stillness. If we fight them, we ignite wars our bones cannot finish. If we yield, we become prisoners of our own dead. He faced the silver mask and said, "The Vitae are bound to the people of this empire. They are not yours to command." The figure tilted its head as if amused by defiance. "All lives are ours. You borrowed them. You wore them. You will repay." The voices carried no threat, only inevitability, and inevitability was heavier than any weapon. Kairos leaned close, whispering so only Aurelian heard. "If this is true, if you fed our empire with stolen fragments, then you are already guilty of what they claim. You chained us to them without confession." His voice trembled with fury contained by necessity. "Why should I defend you from your own crime?" Aurelian's answer was quiet but unflinching. "Because you live. Because survival demanded a sin, and sins are not annulled by silence. Defend me not for what I did, but for what we might still choose." The silver figure raised a hand, and the lanterns around the ring dimmed as if air itself had bent its knee. The palace groaned, Vitae hearts below thrumming louder, echoing with recognition. Ione cried out, eyes bleeding light. They are calling the Vitae to them. They want reunion now. Kairos stepped forward, sword crackling with charge. Then the choice is no longer parley, it is battle. He looked to his father, fury and loyalty colliding like storms. "Stand with me, or admit you are theirs already." Aurelian's gaze drifted to the canopy vessels, to the wings etched with unreadable runes, to the memory of Siren's letter warning him that rescue too often meant arrest. He felt the old bargain coil tight around his heart, the burden of immortality now revealed as theft. The Empire's dusk had not arrived by counsel or abdication. It had arrived in the form of the unforgotten demanding their due. He raised his voice so the hall could hear. "I am not theirs. I will not yield the Vitae, but I cannot hide what I was. If you would fight beside me, know that our enemy carries pieces of ourselves, and the battle will be against our own shadows." Kairos's jaw clenched. He lifted his blade high, declaring loyalty not to the man, but to the choice. "Then let us fight shadows with fire." The silver figure lowered its hand, as if granting permission. From the canopy wings came a sound like a choir breaking, the rupture of centuries yearning for restitution, and the first wave of unforgotten descended, walking not on air but on memory itself, their forms stitched of light and wound, their eyes hollow lanterns. The palace shield shuddered as if already breached. The Vitae below screamed like beating drums dragged toward dismemberment. Aurelian placed the crown upon his head again, though he had vowed to abdicate, because crowns were armor when history sharpened its teeth. "Then dusk becomes war," he said, voice echoing through marble and marrow alike. "And in war, even endings must be earned." The first clash came, light against steel, silence against oath, and the throne orbital trembled as a new war began, not between empires, but between the living and the unforgotten dead who demanded their place in eternity. The first wave broke like moonless surf across the prism hall, and light had weight as the unforgotten pressed against steel and memory, forcing each defender to see not an enemy, but someone they had outlived. Kairos moved through that drowning with short, disciplined strokes, trimming elegies into sparks, Each impact rang a bell that almost said his name. Aurelian shaped the palace with machine cant, folding shields so the tide collided with itself, while Lix collapsed corridors like a surgeon, closing a wound. Vara refused the stretcher, braced at a hinge with pistol and prayer. Ione stood barefoot upon the mirror, whispering counter-requiems that taught the floor to forget grief it could not carry. The silver-masked emissary extended a hand. The vitae below answered, drums quickening in recognition. "They harvest dissonance," Lix said. "Then starve them," Kiros replied, stepping into the vacancy his doubts left. Aurelian called formations that had saved worlds and ruined childhoods, feeling the accusation in every luminous face. They fell back toward the resonance vault, choosing the room where they could be honest. Dust rose in galleries like surprised ancestors. The unforgotten advanced with the patience of litigation, collecting echoes and thickening their choir. Ione staggered, bright blood at her nose. "They comb the vitae through me," she whispered. Aurelian felt forbidden circuitry answer under his palm and tasted shame. "Take me instead," he told the emissary. "Balance your ledgers with me." "You are principle and interest," the voices replied. Vara laughed once and wrote refusal with a shot. "Vent the eastern ducts," Lix said. "Vacuum helps us move." Doors sighed. Wind howled. Banners strained. The unforgotten walked through it like rain. Aurelian swallowed the old command voice and spoke as a penitent architect. Inside the vault, machines woke like choir boys with cracking voices. Ione touched the glass and cried out, seeing constellations inverted, each star a grievance with a pulse. "What if the vitae speaks as witness, not archive?" Aurelian asked. "They already speak," Ione said, "but the chorus conducts them." "Then break the conductor," Kairos answered. The emissary entered without opening a door. "You cannot kill a choir," it said, "but you can dissolve pitch." "The vitae are bonded through my life signal," Aurelian said. "If I sever it, the hearts may fall silent long enough to push you back." "To sever is to die," Kiros said. "To sever is to end." "A theft," Aurelian replied. Lix swore. "Pull that keystone and the palace drops floors like teeth." "Catch what you can," Vara said. The unforgotten dimmed to listen. "We seek not your death," the voices softened, "but your return." "Perhaps they are the same," Aurelian murmured. He stepped onto the dais. The vault recognized him like a wound reopening. Kiros laid his hand over his father's. "Consent, not penance," he said. Pulses braided, light steadied. Distances became honest. "If I die," Aurelian said, "keep the empty chair sacred. If I live, let me be smaller." "I will," Kiros said. Lix began the cut. Sirens woke, grave as monks. The palace counted backward from a number it had sworn never to reach. Below, the hearts hesitated like swimmers at cold water's lip. Aurelian exhaled a word he had not used since Serin's funeral. The dais translated it into voltage and absence. Pain arrived as an eraser across a beloved line. He saw centuries he had occupied like rooms entered uninvited, and did not resist the subtraction. Kiros held fast. Ione sang a ruin's lullaby. Lix tied failing floors into loops. Vara told his blood to be patient. Edges came loose. The choir frayed into throats too small to command. "Hold," Kairos said, as if the word had always kept the world from falling. The cut deepened. The crown became merely metal. The hearts quieted into gardens. A laugh like Serin's moved through him, tender, untriumphant. Then bedrock shifted. Numbers turned carnivorous on Lix's display. "Fail-safe," she said. "If the keystone severs, the hearts collapse into one voice forever." The emissary flickered. Aurelian recognized the cruelty because he had commissioned it young. If he continued, he would save his soul and chain the dead. If he stopped, the unforgotten would take the heart and drown the council's dawn. He looked to Kyros. "Choose," said the strategos, "because love can be a blade laid gently to keep a head upright." Aurelian lifted his hands. The cut hung like lightning in a jar. "I will not let one voice own the dead." "Then you will give them to us," the emissary replied. Kyros raised his blade to buy seconds. Vara broke a hinge that believed itself immortal. Lix struck a red switch no designer builds without imagining their own palm. Ione screamed. The vault echoed. The hearts woke like a planet recalling its name. The floor slid a finger's width. The doors blew inward. Cold rushed from the Empire's bones. A figure stepped through dust with a lamp made of nothing. Every unforgotten turned as a compass salutes north. Aurelian recognized the gate before the face, Serin. Eyes dark with distances, mouth carrying the end of winter. "Not yours," Serin told the emissary, "and not his. They are themselves." The lamp in Serin's hand cast no light, and yet revealed edges, like a map of responsibilities peeled from the dark. "You taught me endings," Aurelian said, voice frayed. "Teach me one that does not crush the living to comfort the dead." Serin's gaze moved from father to son, to the trembling consoles. "There is a third path," they said, "but it requires a wound shared." "Name it," Kyros demanded, blade steady, breath unsteady. "Partition the hearts by choice," Serin answered. "Let every recorded soul decide to sleep, sing alone, or join the chorus." Lix shook her head, doing math at the speed of dread. That protocol was theorized, never tested. The load could tear the vault. "So will every other road," Serin replied softly. And the unforgotten paused, listening as if reminded they too had once been asked. "Choose." The hall quivered with Serin's words, the notion of choice breaking through like dawn through smoke, and even the unforgotten seemed stilled by it, their hollow lantern eyes shimmering as if reminded they had once chosen too. The emissary's silver mask inclined, the chorus wavering for the first time, dissonance curling through their many voices. "Choice is a lie," they declared, though the weight of conviction trembled. "Memory binds. You cannot give freedom to what was already spent." Serin raised the lamp of nothing, and it pulsed with a silence sharper than sound. "Freedom is not a gift," they said. "It is recognition. Even the dead must be allowed to refuse their captors. Even the forgotten must be allowed to sleep." Aurelian's throat ached, his body still bound to the vault's cut, threads of pain weaving through him like fine wire. He saw the faces of centuries, friends, rivals, strangers, all of them woven into the vitae without consent, singing not because they chose but because he had preserved them in fear of loss. Serin's voice pierced deeper than any blade. "Endings are not yours to hoard." Kyros looked between them, his sword trembling with the pressure of decision. "If we open this choice," he said, "we risk collapse. The vault may split, the Empire's core unravel." Lix muttered numbers, her mind drawing the shapes of catastrophe. "Every possibility ends in fracture, but fracture is preferable to slavery." Vara leaned heavily on his pistol, his bloodied form a monument to stubbornness. "If the Empire falls, it falls honestly. Better rubble with dignity than marble with chains." Aurelian stepped forward, staggering, his crown rattling against his brow like a shackle resisting removal. He placed his palm upon the console, feeling the vitae thrum beneath, a galaxy of voices waiting to be acknowledged. "Then let them choose," he whispered. The vault groaned as if the very foundations protested, centuries of encoded silence bracing against rupture. Ione cried out, her small frame glowing as conduits opened through her fragile bones. "They're listening," she gasped. "Every soul waits for the question." Her voice fractured into countless timbres, echoes of lives she had never lived streaming from her mouth. "They are asking what choice means." Serin held the lamp higher and spoke into the storm. "It means you may rest. It means you may sing alone. It means you may join a chorus freely. It means you may be nothing at all." The words entered the vitae like seeds into dark earth. The heartbeat of the empire stuttered, then split into countless rhythms, a forest of decisions unfurling. Light cascaded through the hall, no longer uniform, but fractured into prisms of colour, some bright with song, some dim with final silence, some flickering between. The unforgotten wailed, not in triumph or defeat, but in astonishment, their forms faltering as the souls they had claimed stepped away from them. The emissary clutched at its mask as voices poured out, no longer braided, no longer obedient. "You cannot," it cried. "They were ours." But the sentence fractured as its choir dissolved, voices slipping from its grip like sand through stone fingers. Its wings sagged, runes unraveling, light spilling out in broken syllables. Some souls chose to remain with the unforgotten, but many scattered, flowing into silence or into the lamp Serin held, joining new patterns beyond ownership. The strain shook the palace. Licks screamed equations as consoles cracked, sparks falling like meteors. The floor shuddered, walls buckled, corridors screamed with splitting stone. "We can't hold it," Lix yelled. "The load is tearing the vault apart." Kairos seized his father's shoulder, holding him upright as Aurelian's body convulsed with every departing soul. "Stay with me," he urged. But Aurelian's eyes rolled back, light searing through his veins. "They are leaving," Aurelian whispered, voice breaking, "and they are forgiving nothing." Serin crossed to him, lamp steady, and pressed their forehead to his. "They don't need to forgive. They only need to be free." Aurelian wanted to answer, but the light dragged words from his throat before they could form. He saw Serin's eyes, calm, patient, holding him through the storm. For the first time in centuries he felt small enough to die. The vault cracked open with a roar. Above, the canopy fleet reeled, their wings unravelling into dust as their chorus collapsed. The emissaries screamed, silver masks shattering into 1,000 mirrors that fell without sound. The unforgotten scattered into sparks, some fading, some joining the lamp, some dissolving into nothing. The bruise in the sky trembled, hollowing into a silence deeper than space, and then vanished as if it had never been. When the echoes cleared, the hall was a ruin, pillars broken, consoles melted, dust thick as fog. Ione lay unconscious but breathing, her skin pale as parchment. Vara sat slumped, blood drying to rust. Lix staggered, burned but alive, equations still twitching in her fingers. Kairos knelt by his father, whose crown had fallen beside him, cracked open like a shell. Aurelian's chest still rose and fell, faint, as if his body had been hollowed and left for echoes. Serin stood over them, the lamp dimming. "He chose to open the door," they said softly. "Whether he passes through or lingers is not ours to command." Kairos lifted his father's head, eyes burning with conflict. If he lives, he must answer for centuries of theft. If he dies, he becomes martyr, and martyrdom is a lie too heavy for the council to bear. Serin's gaze was endless night. He will live long enough to know the weight of both. The lamp extinguished, leaving only shadow where light had once been. Above, the stars were honest again. No choir pulled them, no bridge bent them. The Scarlight fleet lingered beyond the cord, hesitant, uncertain whether to claim victory or defeat. Citizens below looked skyward, some praying, some weeping, some simply breathing as if for the first time. The vitae had been changed forever, fragmented, individualized, freed. No single will own them now, not Aurelians, not the Unforgottens. Kairos rose, lifting the crown from the floor. He did not place it on his head. He held it at arm's length, as though it were heavier than steel, heavier than eternity. "This ends," he said to those who remained. Lix nodded. Ione stirred. Vara smiled faintly, even through pain. Seren was gone, leaving only the echo of their step. Kairos turned to his father, still clinging to life, and whispered, "You taught me preservation. Tonight you taught me surrender. Perhaps tomorrow you will teach me how to live without you." And with that, the new dusk began, fragile, fractured, alive. Night bled into a spare morning with no music, only the tick of damaged servitors and the hiss of cooling stone. And Kairos stood on the balcony above a city that smelled of ozone and redemption, while Aurelians slept below in a coma that looked like prayer with the breath wrung out of it. The Scarlight fleet kept station beyond the cord, their running lights pulsing like restrained heartbeats, as if they feared to move lest the ring interpret motion as hunger. Vara limped a circuit of the upper wards and returned with reports written in the grammar of endurance. Markets reopening at half-light, looters fed by the same gruel as guards, priests remembering how to bless without ledgers. Lix slept for 1 hour on a coil of cable, woke with equations in her teeth, and began to bind broken grids with the patience of a midwife. Ione lay pale but breathing, her pulse echoing to the vault like a pebble dropped into a deep well. Kairos ordered the banners taken down, not burned but folded and archived, because forgetting would only sharpen the knives of those who waited for a lie. He walked districts that had learned to fear his steps and found, instead of dread, a complicated relief, as if the Empire had unclenched a fist and did not yet know what to hold. Water guilds opened their gates and let channels remember their meanders. Clockmakers unshuttered faces to daylight and let fragile springs talk about time without permission. Children chalked constellations on broken plazas and argued over the names of things as if names could be mended. On a stair of cracked alabaster, a woman pressed a tin cup into his hand and asked him to drink like anyone. The sip tasted of brown metal and future rain. He thanked her and asked for her strongest complaint. She asked for paths that ignored straight lines, and he promised to erase rulers before noon. Promises were bridges, he thought, and bridges must be walked until they become roads. At noon, a delegation from the Scarlight flagship crossed the cord in a shuttle blunt as a knuckle. They were captains he had trained and disappointed. Adra, with braided scars. Kel, who had once shot a hat from his head to prove a point about wind. Pan, whose laughter had retired when the first revolt succeeded. They stood in the Prism Hall's surviving aisle and offered protection disguised as tutelage. "The marches wait to see if the Corps remembers how to be honest," Adra said. "Give us the chair, and we will teach it to sit." Kairos heard the hunger behind courtesy and answered with a shape the appetite could not hold. "The council will chair itself," he said. "You will hold the cord and keep wreckers from teaching the void new tricks. You will train our militia to move like gardeners, not wolves." When Adra asked about the crown, he replied that the metal would rest until the council invented a ritual without kneeling. They departed unsettled, which was the correct temperature for ambition. Lix assembled a provisional council from those who had refused to profit during the worst years, which left her with clerks, midwives, machinists, archivists, a ferryman who spoke 4 dialects of grief, and a choir leader who could sight-read a riot. They met in a cafeteria because power should relearn the smell of soup, and drafted articles that began with the dead and ended with water. Ione woke fully and said the freed souls had settled into patterns like weather. Some gathered above hospitals, some over playgrounds, some hovered in silent spirals where no building had the courage to rise. Kiros asked what the spirals wanted. "To see if we will keep promises without hands on our shoulders," she answered, and fell asleep sitting upright, like a candle that refused to drip. At dusk, alarm stitched a thin red seam through the halls, intimate and ordinary. Lix pulled schematics across the air. The wound spelled sabotage in a grammar older than revenants. Power relays spiked in sequence toward reservoirs that kept the city from remembering thirst. The saboteurs were not ghosts, but men with the old purity of grievance crusted into creed. Kairos moved with the economy of one who had learned where violence lives most profitably, not in risks or rhetoric, but in ladders, valves, and brittle timing. He led a wedged-down service wells that smelled of copper and regret, Vara at his shoulder like a weathered prayer, Lix feeding maps that changed their minds every corner. They found the crew in a sub-level where the air held the temperature of treachery. The leader wore a worker's jacket sewn with private liturgies and smiled the smile of a priest about to break a chalice for emphasis. Kiros did not give him a speech. He let silence outline the man's shape, then cut the power ladder with a quick shot, while Vara took the flank with the steadiness of a litany. The fight was brutal and precise. Elbows against valves, muzzles against steel, seconds sharpened to a needle. 2 saboteurs set their weapons down when they saw their plans were smaller than the water. The leader reached for a trigger doctrine had taught to think itself sacred. Lix tripped a local dead zone, and the click became a soft confession. When it ended, Kiros stood above them, breathing like a runner at the mouth of winter. He told the prisoners to speak their motives into record and promised jury by people who had tasted the same rations. They carried survivors gently, and the dead gently too, because the new dusk required that arithmetic. Kiros spoke to the ring again with dirt on his sleeves. "We will fail publicly and repair publicly. If secrecy tempts you, drink water until the thirst passes." The city breathed. Lanterns stood up straighter. Somewhere a clock remembered the hour without permission. In the infirmary, Aurelian floated between machines like an apology too light to anchor. Kairos took his father's hand and told him about saboteurs and soup, about children chalking freed constellations on the floor, about a choir leader who could turn an argument into a chord. "You taught me preservation," he whispered. "Now teach me how to hold and let go in the same breath." Aurelian did not stir, but the monitors answered with a gentler metronome. 3 days passed like blood through linen. The articles grew teeth and humility. Water ran clear. Saboteurs were given work that used their steadiness, but denied their creed the oxygen of secrecy. Ione charted the weather of freed souls and found the spiral above the vault thinning to a ring, not hostile, not benign, merely watchful. On the 4th morning the cord lit with a language Kairos had not taught it, a scatter of civilian craft with pilgrim paint, freighters with widowed hulls, courier tubs tugging rumours behind them like nets. As the first ragged ships kissed the ports, a shadow ran ahead of them like a nearer fire. Somewhere beyond the marches a throne older than Aurelian had also cracked. and its shards were being traded for miracles. The rumour tasted of iron and sweet rot. Kiros felt the season turn in his bones and knew the external war would resume whether he bid it or not. He faced the dawn and gave it his small vow. Ballots before blades, vows before verdicts, bridges walked until they were roads, an empty chair turning slowly so the dead could keep their ordinary watch. The pilgrim, flotillas settled on the ring with the unease of birds returning to branches that had burned, and each vessel carried not simply bodies, but rumours wrapped in cloth, whispered through metal ribs, poured into the ears of dock workers who no longer knew what truth felt like. They spoke of a throne beyond the marches crumbling, older even than Aurelian's claim, a dynasty that had hidden in dust now split open like a long-buried reliquary, its shards traded in black markets as relics, its names prayed to in half-forgotten dialects. Kairos listened, jaw tight, while the cafeteria council took its soup with one hand and its rumours with the other. Adra and Kel pressed for immediate expansion, to strike at the vacuum before others filled it, but Kairos refused, saying the council's first task was breath, not conquest. The ferryman suggested waiting to see who else moved. The midwives argued that waiting invited famine. The choir leader sang each rumour into a chord, showing how fear and hope shared the same root note. The council adjourned with more questions than articles, and Kairos walked home through streets where chalk constellations had begun to glow faintly in the dusk, as if the freed souls were lending the children light to finish their maps. In the infirmary, Aurelian remained bound to silence, though his fingers sometimes twitched, as if rehearsing words he could not yet deliver. Kairos sat with him, crown still locked in a drawer, and spoke to him as if to a council of one. The people breathe, but shallow. The saboteurs wait, but their patience is doctrine. Serin's path has given us freedom, but no guardrails. Did you know it would be this thin? The machines answered with quiet beeps that mocked eternity. For the first time, Kairos felt how heavy the crown would be if he placed it on his own head, and how light it looked abandoned. Lix found him the next morning with numbers drawn in soot on her arms. The fragments of the unforgotten left interference in the cord, she said. Something listens from the bruise they tore open. Not the same chorus, but a cousin, a hunger with less patience. Kairos wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, but remembered the way the emissary's mask had cracked like glass under firelight. He asked how long, until the hunger arrived. Lix answered with a shrug. Hunger is already here. It waits to be fed a name. Ione confirmed it in her dreams, describing a spiral of shadows pressing against the vault from outside, not demanding, only watching. They are curious, she whispered, and curiosity is only kindness when it is weak. The council drafted laws that stumbled like children, reparations in grain, water lines freed of quotas, a tribunal of rotating strangers to hear grievances in public halls. Yet every decree tasted provisional, as if the ink could feel the bruise widening in the dark. Pilgrims pressed their foreheads to the palace gates, asking not for bread, but for prophecy, and Kairos gave them only honesty. We know less than you, but we choose more. Some wept at the simplicity. Others left convinced he was hollow. Adra accused him of surrender by inaction. Pan muttered that without expansion, rebellion would bloom again. Kairos replied that if rebellion bloomed, it would be honest bloom, not rot forced by chains. His words spread unevenly, sometimes like seed, sometimes like smoke. On the fifth dusk, a transmission came across every band at once. voice stretched through static like a song, dragged too slowly across strings. We watched you choose. We tasted division. We inherit what you discard. No name, no vessel, only promise. Panic gripped the council. Fear of a new revenant clothed in hunger. Kyros ordered the cord reinforced, Starlight fleets doubling their vigil. Lanterns along the orbital line were relit, though each flickered as if doubting its own oil. Lix worked until her fingers bled, building noise to drown signals, but still the voice seeped through cracks. Inherit, it repeated, each time slower, heavier. I only dreamt of faces that had no mouths, leaning close, listening for the sound of despair. Kyros spoke again to his father. If you wake, tell me if this is another bargain you hid. If you sleep, I will decide without you. He found the crown in his drawer, heavy with expectation, and nearly placed it upon his brow. But he stopped, remembering Seren's lamp and the choice given to the dead. He whispered instead, I will not wear what I cannot refuse. He closed the drawer and went to the balcony where the stars looked nearer, as if eavesdropping. He raised his sword instead of the crown and told the fleets, if hunger comes, it will not inherit lies. We will meet it as fractured, unarmored, breathing. The message spread across lantern lines and pilgrim decks, a vow both fragile and defiant. The night answered with silence, but silence was only another word for delay. Citizens lit fires on plazas, not for ritual, but to keep their own shadows honest. The spiral above the vault widened, faint but undeniable, and the freed souls shifted restlessly as if warning of a new chorus rehearsing. Ione pressed her ear to the floor and whispered, they are not yet here, but they are practicing. Lix nodded grimly. Every practice becomes performance. Kyros felt the dusk stretch into a precipice. He walked among his people without armor, hearing their grief and their laughter in equal measure. And for the first time in his life, he felt smaller than the empire he carried, smaller and therefore closer to human. When he returned to the infirmary, Aurelian's eyes were open, gazing at nothing. His lips moved, cracked and slow. Kyros bent to hear. Not yet, not over. Then his breath faltered back into silence. Kyros closed his father's eyes with a soldier's touch and whispered, then I will keep the dusk alive until dawn chooses itself. And outside, in the bruise of space where no empire had claim, something stirred. Dawn drew its edge along the ring, and the bruise in space learned to stare, a pupil where no iris belonged, and Kyros watched with the council while a city practiced breathing in public. Lanterns along the cord held like patient heartbeats. Starlight hulls nested in quiet chevrons. Pilgrim freighters wheeled like minnows around scarred ports. A nurse said Aurelian's hands had twitched as if rehearsing a sentence. Kyros took the news, like a pilgrim takes a rumor, grateful and suspicious. The bruise is changing grammar, Lix said, not chorus, something that studies consent for leverage. Ione, pale but standing, listened to flaws and answered, it waits for us to name it. The first thought came without signal, placed behind the ear like a considerate theft. We are the airless. We inherit abandoned oaths and ruined ledgers. Permit us to stabilize your choice. We design structures that survive remorse. Vara's laugh clicked against his ribs. Administration wearing silk. Kyros kept his eyes on the bruise. If you are architects, build patience. A filament extruded from not light and wove a pier that stopped a breath from the ring. A figure resolved upon it, an uncle memory assembled from 100 kitchens. Kind eyes, tired mouth, a scar shaped like forgiveness. It bowed to the city rather than to any throne. We do not cross lines you draw, the thought continued. Invite us, and we will stand where you bind us, time to your sunset. Kairos convened the council on the plaza, where chalk constellations glowed with borrowed souls. Do we invite them? He asked. Ours only, revocable by bread vote, forbidden secrecy. Hands rose, unsure birds. The ferryman said, a ferry once crossed becomes a bridge, and voted no. The midwives split. The choir leader abstained, saying the key had not yet been found. The motion failed by hands and hesitation. The constructs applauded without sound, a soft uncoiling that steadied lanterns. We admire refusals that cost, said the airless. We will hold beyond the cord. When thirst outvotes pride, call us by our other name, administration. Lix muttered, they make surrender feel domestic. Kairos ordered the cord doubled, and the bands salted with noise. Relief lasted a shallow hour. Then the vault hurt like a tooth. Freed soul weather spun into tight cyclones over hospitals. Roofs hummed, consoles bled pale fire. Ione seized, then steadied. It is not them, she gasped. It is the partition fraying. Solos want witness that does not devour them. They ran, council and captains, downstairs that remembered coronations and mutinies, into the resonance vault where glass had learned to remember light. Aurelian stood with help. Machines grafted to his stubborn breath, eyes bright with ruin and clarity. Listen, he said, voice corrugated by pain. Through the floor, thin threads rose from markets and docks, from wards and workshops, consents travelling like veins toward the heart. Lix stared as if at a beautiful fire. A distributed chorus, she whispered. Mortal, civic, hungry for mandate, not for blood. Aurelian set his palm to the console and winced. The Empire wanted a single throat. They want a mouth with lungs that can tire. Terms, Kairos said, because love without fences is appetite. They climbed to the plaza. The city gathered in rings. The airless held their distance like polite accountants of collapse. Kairos spoke so that even dust listened. We will authorize a chorus that breathes. Sunset limits it. Secrecy forbids it. Any citizen may revoke it with bread held up and counted. The empty chair will audit. No engines, no weapons, no archive that cannot sleep. Hands rose, thousands, some trembling, some sure. Bells answered from different throats. The vote carried, and the ground said yes in a long, relieved exhale. The airless inclined their uncle and did not enter. We approve your mortal god, they thought. We will copy nothing. We will keep watch as neighbours. Aurelian sagged. Vara became a blunt miracle at his side. Ione smiled through tears not entirely her own. Lix's eyes shone with equations holy enough to frighten her. Then the chorus flexed. Queues at docks rewrote themselves around the slow. Water rebalanced without orders. Power shaved from statues-fed clinics. A militia company lowered rifles because the breath above them refused. The city obeyed and was not humiliated by obedience. Kairos had led fleets that answered less quickly. He sat later on the infirmary floor and spoke to the man whose shadow had been government. We have made a god with a pulse, he said. I will kill it if it forgets to ask. Aurelian's mouth cracked into humour that tasted of salt. Promise you will kill me first if I forget. You are at last too small to kill, Kairos answered. Night braided itself back into the sky. The airless drifted outward, patient. Kairos bought a tin cup of water from the guild mistress who had once demanded crooked paths. It tasted of iron learning to be rain. He almost believed in dawn. Just before it, the bruise quivered again, not the airless. A colder appetite, Along the cord, a lane of lanterns pinched out one by one, as if pressed between fingers. Scarlight captains whispered contacts without shapes, mass without signatures, a tide that erased instruments by touching them. Lick stared at ruined boards and did new arithmetic. Not inheritance, she said. Predation. Ione woke from a dream of doors nailed shut. Kiros stood with sword in the crook of his arm and called to the city, to the fledgling chorus, to the fleets waiting like disciplined wolves. Hold, he said, because the word had always kept edges from unravelling. The lanterns failed farther along. The dark approached like patience made carnivorous. Aurelian opened his eyes and found Kiros in the noise and managed. Not yet. Not over. Then we will keep the dusk, Kiros answered, stepping to the edge where the new night learned its teeth. Until whatever this is names itself, and even then we choose. Together still. The lantern lines extinguishing spread like a disease in the night, each pinched flame a vertebra broken in the cord's spine. And Kairos stood beneath the failing horizon with sword lowered but ready, listening to silence turn sharp. The chorus of citizens, the fragile god born of consent, wavered, their murmured rhythm disrupted by fear that had no name. Lix pressed her palms to cracked consoles, her mouth whispering numbers like prayers that could not multiply fast enough. Vara barked orders to Scarlight captains, but the captains answered with static. Their ships blinked out, not destroyed, only unmoored, instruments erased mid-breath. Ione swayed on the plaza steps, her eyes rolled white, her mouth spilling a flood of voices none recognized, as if the hunger itself rehearsed through her throat. Then the dark pressed closer, a tide without hulls, swallowing lanterns, lanterns swallowing courage. The airless did not move to help, only held their distance, their uncle face watching as if this moment were a page they had seen in draft, but never in final print. Predation, Lix whispered. No desire for worship or order, only consumption. Kiros gritted his teeth. Then it will find us indigestible. He raised his blade, angled not at the dark, but at the city, signalling resilience like an oath. The chorus stuttered, then caught, voices braiding into steadier breath. Hold, hold, hold. The plaza lit with the sound of endurance. But the hunger did not recoil. Instead, it pushed a finger into the cord, blotting entire sectors. And when it withdrew, the stars, they were gone. Not hidden, gone. Citizens screamed as if pieces of sky had been harvested. Kiros felt the Empire's dusk tilt toward collapse. He turned to his father, carried onto the steps in a litter of stubbornness, pale and ragged but awake. Aurelian's eyes burned with the same clarity that had once built empires. Not war, he rasped. Hunger cannot be slain. It must be starved. How? Kiros demanded, sword trembling with impatience. Aurelian lifted a hand that shook like a failing metronome. The chorus. Feed it sacrifice, not fear. Offer it something too heavy to carry, and it will choke. His gaze did not leave Kiros. That means me. Kiros felt the words like a knife pressed to his own chest. No, you gave centuries. That debt is closed. Aurelian coughed, blood flecking his lips. Closed debts do not stop hunger. If I go into it, burdened with every oath, every theft, every crown I wore too long, it will slow. Long enough for you to teach the chorus teeth. Seren's voice came unbidden in Kairos's memory, soft as water. Endings are not yours to hoard. He realized now that Aurelian's ending had always been waiting for permission. Ione stirred, eyes returning from whatever horizon she had stared into. The hunger doesn't know choice, she whispered. If he walks in willingly, It will learn a shape it cannot swallow clean. Kiros dropped to his knees beside the litter. His hand, scarred and calloused from campaigns, found his father's, skeletal now, but still iron beneath the parchment. "If you go," he said, voice breaking, "you go not as emperor, but as man. Promise me that." Aurelian's cracked lips curved in the ghost of a smile. "At last," he breathed, smaller than the empire. They rose together, father leaning on son, son holding more than weight. The chorus quieted, sensing the moment. Thousands of breaths pulled inward like the pause before thunder. The hunger pressed closer, lanterns falling away until only the plaza glowed, a lone island in a devouring sea. The airless watched, inscrutable, recording with eyes that reflected ruin and rebirth. Aurelian stepped forward, each pace a surrender of centuries. His crown was gone, his armor rusted into memory. He wore only a robe of plain cloth, as if to remind the void that he had been born mortal once. Kiros followed until the last step, then stopped, sword lowered, eyes drowning. Aurelian touched his son's cheek with fingers light as dusk. "Rule nothing," he said, "and you may lead everything." Then he turned and walked toward the edge where lanterns failed. The hunger parted like a wound to receive him. He did not resist. He opened his arms, carrying the ledger of centuries, carrying empires preserved too long, carrying thefts and loves and betrayals. His body shimmered with the weight of memory, and the dark, unready for burden, convulsed. Stars blinked back into place behind it, as if choking. The hunger writhed, retreating, dragging Aurelian deeper until both were gone. Silence followed, immense and unbearable. The chorus exhaled as one, voices trembling but alive. Lanterns steadied. The cord glowed again, dim but unbroken. Kiros fell to his knees, sword clattering on stone. Lix's tears carved clean lines on her soot-streaked cheeks. Vara removed his helmet in respect, head bowed. Ione whispered. He gave them more than life. He gave them the empire itself, as ballast. The airless inclined their head. The uncle faced kind and cruel in equal measure. "We have witnessed. We will not inherit. You have paid with ending." Then they too withdrew, their peer unweaving, their presence folding back into the bruise until only honest stars remained. Kiros stood slowly, sword in hand, crown still hidden. He faced the council, the citizens, the fleets. "The dusk remains," he said, voice breaking but unyielding. "We are not devoured, but dawn will not be given to us. We must build it, plank by plank, voice by voice." The chorus answered, not as a roar, but as a steady murmur, 1,000 small affirmations binding into strength. Children pressed chalk to stone and drew Aurelian's silhouette, walking into dark, not as emperor, but as man. Kiros looked once more at the horizon where his father had vanished. "Together still," he whispered, then raised his sword not to command, but to promise. The night did not answer, but the city did, and for now that was enough. The ring exhaled as if it had survived drowning, though every stone carried the taste of salt and ash. Aurelian was gone, devoured or sanctified, but the silence he left behind pressed harder than any empire. Kiros stood on the plaza, where chalk drawings glowed faintly in starlight, his sword lowered but not sheathed, unable to let the steel rest, while the horizon still whispered of appetite. Citizens gathered in slow arcs, voices hushed, eyes wide, waiting for instruction that would not sound like command. He did not give them speeches. He gave them presence, his breathing steady, his scars honest. Lix moved among the people with blackened fingers, writing names into soot so they could be read aloud by those who had never held power. Vara leaned against a column, body near collapse, but every glance he gave the crowd steadied them more than sermons could. Ione sat on the steps, her small hands tracing patterns only she could see, murmuring fragments of the freed souls that lingered, guardians or simply echoes. Kairos looked toward the horizon where lanterns still trembled, the bruise erased but not forgotten. The airless had withdrawn, but their promise remained, to return if invited, to rebuild with silk chains. He knew hunger might return too, not satisfied, only delayed. Between those spectres lay his charge, an empire fractured into people who had tasted freedom and might starve it if they feared too much. He raised his sword, not in triumph, but in declaration. "The crown is gone," he said, his voice reaching alleys and balconies, carried by silence more than echo. "No throne will command you. The chorus is yours, not mine. If I lead, it will be by walking beside you. If I falter, raise bread against me." The crowd did not roar. Instead, a murmur of assent rolled like tide against stone. A gentler vow, fragile but true. Later, in the infirmary's dim light, he sat beside the empty bed where Aurelian had once laboured for breath. He placed the crown's broken fragments on the sheet, each shard a reflection of his own face. "Smaller than the empire," he whispered, the words tasting of grief and inheritance. He did not weep, though grief coiled tight in his chest. Instead, he closed his eyes and let silence mark the space where his father had stood too long. Beyond the cord, fleets shifted cautiously, and pilgrims lit lanterns in patterns that spelled both mourning and beginnings. The chorus whispered through the city's veins, not uniform, not obedient, but alive, correcting itself like water finding shape. Kairos rose, sword in hand, crown left, shattered behind him. He walked back into the night where his people waited, and the dusk, though weary, did not collapse. It endured, scarred and trembling, yet luminous with the fragile possibility of dawn. The city dreamed uneasily beneath the lantern line, its plazas thick with ash prayers and chalk constellations that glowed where children had pressed their hopes into stone. Kairos walked among them with sword sheathed, but never far, each step echoing like a vow he could not stop repeating. Not emperor, not crown, only witness. The people watched him without bowing, their eyes neither adoring nor hostile, only searching for proof that dusk could stretch without collapsing. His silence answered more than speeches, for silence had become the empire's last honest tongue. Lips worked sleepless, fingers scrawling formulas across broken walls, binding power lines into braids that pulsed like arteries. Her eyes had grown hollow, yet when citizens asked what she was building, she said only, "A body for the chorus to wear." Vara drifted through markets with the weight of an old sentinel, leaning on crutches yet refusing any rest, his voice harsh but steady when traders hesitated to share. "Equality," he barked, "isn't charity, it's breath." The words stuck in stalls like nails, holding commerce upright. Ione became an oracle unwillingly. Children gathered around her when she walked, pressing their palms to hers, seeking glimpses of the souls that lingered. She gave no prophecy, only fragments. Laughter caught in rafters, grief pressed into wells, the names of those who had chosen silence. Some found comfort, others terror, but none doubted she heard beyond walls. Kairos met with the council in the cafeteria that still smelled of broth and smoke. Articles sprawled across the table, scratched into steel sheets with knives. The ferrymen argued for opening gates to pilgrim fleets, the midwives for sealing them, fearing contagion. The choir leader sang their quarrels into harmonies that turned rage into weary compromise. No decision satisfied, yet decisions came. Grain rationed by vote, tribunals drawn from strangers, lantern oil pooled by districts. It was a republic of stumbling, and in its stumbles, Kairos felt something raw but alive. Still, beyond the cord, shadows lingered. The airless watched without intrusion, their uncle face reflecting patience too sharp to be kindness. And further still, in the dark where hunger had withdrawn, new whispers stirred. Traders spoke of systems left hollow, of ships vanishing without wreckage, of voices that asked no questions before silence fell. The dusk stretched fragile and trembling, a tightrope across an abyss. That night, Kairos climbed the balcony alone. Stars shone with unearned serenity. He laid the fragments of his father's crown upon the stone rail, scattering them like teeth. Smaller than the empire, he whispered again, a promise to himself as much as to the void. His sword lay beside him, no longer weight but reminder. Behind him, the city murmured, alive in its stumbling. Ahead, the horizon carried a quiet bruise, waiting. Dawn had not yet chosen them. It might never. Still, he remained, keeper of Deuce. The bruise on the horizon thickened by increments too small for charts, but too heavy for hearts to ignore. Each night the lantern line dimmed at its edges, as though the dark was tasting boundaries. Kairos watched from the balcony, fragments of his father's crown still scattered where he had left them, and he felt the dusk shiver beneath his ribs. The chorus whispered through the streets, alive but restless, correcting disputes, soothing riots, even guiding lost children home. Yet its voice faltered whenever eyes turned outward. It had no language for what approached. Licks announced the equations no longer held. The chorus bends within itself, she said, hands black with soot. But against the bruise it has no grammar. To fight hunger, we must teach it contradiction. We must give it a wound. Vara objected, voice raw as rust. You would scar the only thing that steadies us. But even as he spoke, he knew stasis was death. Ione confirmed it with her trembling visions. The souls want edges, she whispered. They chose silence or song, but the hunger was never offered choice. If we give it paradox, it may choke again. The council met under lantern smoke. Midwives wept at the thought of wounding the chorus. The ferryman warned that ferries built on paradox sink. But the choir leader sang softly, better to tear a seam than surrender the cloth. Debate became exhaustion. Exhaustion became assent. They chose to fracture deliberately what had once been whole. Kairos stood before the citizens that dusk, his sword strapped across his back. The chorus is ours, he said. We must mark it with contradiction, so it learns defiance. Tonight we vote not for peace but for survival. Bread was lifted, counted, and shadows stretched long as hands rose. The vote carried with no joy, only grim clarity. Ione knelt at the plaza's heart, whispering invitations into the dust. The freed souls responded, spiraling above her like storm clouds learning a hymn. Licks guided their patterns with trembling calculations, etching paradox into the weave. Truth and falsehood entwined, silence stitched to song. The chorus convulsed, groaned, then steadied, its voice suddenly deeper, rougher, carrying both harmony and fracture. Citizens clutched their chests as the sound rolled through them, unsettling but undeniable. From the horizon the bruise answered, pressing closer, and for the first time it recoiled as if stung. Lanterns flared brighter. The chorus laughed and wept in the same breath, a sound that bent the air until even stone shivered. Vara, scarred and limping, raised his fist. It worked, he growled. though his eyes were wet. Kiros looked skyward, breathing the strange, jagged song now pulsing through the city. It was imperfect, unstable, but alive in a way no empire had ever been. "Father," he whispered to the vanished horizon, "we have given them a wound. Now teach us how to endure it." The bruise throbbed, retreating but not gone, as dusk held fast another night. The wound they had given the chorus spread like fire beneath skin, unpredictable and alive, and for the first time the people heard their collective voice snarl as well as soothe. It unsettled them, but it steadied them too, for the bruise on the horizon no longer pressed unchallenged. Lanterns flared in answer, brighter than their oil deserved, as if the sky itself had learned defiance. Kiros walked the plaza, sword across his back, feeling the tension in every step of his people. They did not kneel, did not cheer, but they followed him with eyes that asked if wounds could hold, when dawn demanded more than dusk could give. Lix worked herself toward collapse, coaxing paradox into equations that had no business holding shape. Her voice grew hoarse from whispering calculations, yet, when asked if it was enough, she only shook her head. "Enough is a word for endings," she said. "We are still inside a beginning." Vara carried his crutches through districts like banners, barking at hoarders, laughing at fear, reminding all who listened that breath was ration enough if it was shared. Ione dreamt more vividly now, her frail body caught between silence and chorus. She told Kiros that some freed souls were choosing the wound willingly, binding themselves into its jagged rhythm. "They want to be dangerous," she whispered, "and I don't know if that is mercy or betrayal." The bruise thickened at the edges of vision. Pilgrims reported stars vanishing in clusters, lanterns extinguished before their glass could even crack. Fleets sent scouts that never returned, not destroyed, only erased. When asked what they saw before silence, the last message was a single word: hunger. Kiros gathered the council beneath fractured banners. "We cannot wait for dawn to declare itself," he said. "We must decide what shape we want if the bruise becomes storm." The ferryman urged retreat inward, sealing the ring and abandoning the marches. The midwives demanded evacuation, scattering civilians to stars still honest. The choir leader sang softly, "If we scatter, the chorus breaks. If we hide, the wound closes. We must face it and keep breathing." Kiros looked at the fragments of the crown still scattered on the balcony rail where he had left them, shards glinting like broken teeth. He lifted one piece, held it against the night, then let it fall into the plaza dust. "No crown," he said, "only the wound, only the chorus. If we endure, it will not be because one man stood tall, but because all of us held jagged together." His words spread through streets like embers, catching not in cheers, but in the steady murmur of affirmation. That night the bruise pulsed, closer than ever. The chorus howled in paradox, laughter and grief interwoven, and the city trembled. Kiros stood at the balcony's edge, sword raised, knowing the next night would not end in endurance alone. It would end in reckoning. The final dusk arrived without ceremony, the bruise swelling until it stretched across half the horizon, a shadow that swallowed stars and returned nothing. The lantern line guttered though oil was full, as if flame itself feared what approached. The chorus trembled, its fractured voice caught between defiance and despair, and in that trembling Kairos felt the weight of every oath his father had left unfinished. He stood on the plaza, sword in hand, fragments of the crown still scattered like teeth around his boots. His people gathered in silence, thousands of faces turned upward, waiting not for command, but for a shape to hold against the dark. Lix staggered from the vault with soot caked into her lungs, clutching equations like dying birds. "The chorus can cut the bruise open," she rasped, "but it will tear itself apart to do it. Paradox is fuel, not shield." Vara leaned on his crutches, armor dented, voice harsh with truth. "Then let it tear. Better we die honest than live erased." Ione stood between them, small, trembling, her eyes glowing with echoes. "The souls want release," she whispered. "They chose the wound. Now they ask us to spend them. If we loose the chorus, it will burn with everything. Our voices, their voices, all of it." The council faltered, the midwives crying, the ferryman silent, the choir leader singing under his breath as if to soften inevitability. Kairos lifted his sword and the sound fell still. "We are dusk," he said. "Dawn will not arrive to rescue us. We must carve it ourselves, even if the blade is our own throat." He turned to Ione. "Open it. Let the chorus choose, even if it chooses to die." She closed her eyes and knelt. The plaza floor split with light, spirals of souls rising in storms of laughter and grief. Lix's equations flared, carving contradiction into the air, truth tangled with falsehood, mercy with cruelty. The chorus screamed, a sound that bent stone, shattered glass, cracked the heavens. The bruise convulsed as the wound was flung wide, the hunger struck with a flavor it could not swallow. Voices unbroken, broken, free, enslaved, all at once. It recoiled, shrieking, collapsing inward, a tide devouring itself. The city shook. Lanterns burst. Citizens fell to their knees, not in worship, but in the sheer weight of sound. The chorus flared brighter, burning through its own body, each soul unspooling into silence or scattering into stars. One by one, the voices dimmed until only a whisper remained, faint, ragged, but human. Then it was gone. The bruise faded. The horizon held honest starlight once more. Kairos stood swaying, sword lowered, staring into emptiness. His people rose slowly, broken but breathing. The chorus was gone. The wound was closed. Only mortals remained. He sheathed his blade, lifted his face to the unbroken night and whispered, "Together still." And in the fragile quiet that followed, dawn finally began.